Can you hear me? Hi. Thank you so much for being here today. So basically, so far we've heard about how fantastic technologies can lead to growth opportunities, and probably it's very hopeful that maybe the brain drain can be restored. But I want to talk to you today about how technology can actually make us more active as citizens and reinforce our sense of civic duty. As you all know, corruption is one of the biggest plagues that has hit Greece throughout decades of mismanagement that have led us to where we find ourselves today. I want to start from my own personal story. It actually becomes personal. I'm sure that the majority of the people in this room have actually experienced an instance of corruption or bribery, whether it was through friends, circles, family, or themselves. In 2012, my grandfather, who is right here, he was a very proud war veteran who had served in the Greek Civil War, was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And we had to rush him to the nearest public hospital in the Peloponnese, where we were faced with absolute medical neglect because the doctors there expected a bribe. Now, for my grandfather, who was 86% handicapped, who was prepared to fight for Greece and give his well-being and even his life to protect our nation, it was the most humiliating instance that we had ever faced as a family. This is me and my grandpa. As you can see, I was a can-can dancer at Halloween, and that's when he was very sick in the hospital. I was so moved by our experience. He cried at the end of his surgery, and he told me to leave Greece and to never come back. And he said, "This isn't a place for people like you. It's a place for, it's just not, it's a hopeless place. Just leave, just never turn back." And I dedicated this website to him because I actually didn't agree with him. I felt that we actually had to start talking about the problem if we were going to fix it. If we were going to do something about it, we had to break the omerta that had basically silenced us for so many years. I felt vulnerable, I felt weak, and I felt unprotected in front of a system that was so well guarded and in place for decades. I went back to Yale University, where I was completing my thesis in political science, and I wanted to write about corruption. And I realized that I did not have the statistics or the data to support my thesis. Back then in 2010, there was only a survey that had been done by Transparency International that said 6 in 10 Greeks or 7 in 10 Greeks have actually admitted to paying a bribe. Well, that wasn't enough. Where were the numbers? Where were these bribes being paid? Were they in hospitals? Were they in driver's permits? Were they to tax inspection authorities? Who were we paying these bribes to? How much were we paying? And why were we paying? If we're going to solve corruption, we need to understand why it happens, where it happens, and who's responsible for it. So in a very rudimentary platform, as you can see, nothing fancy whatsoever. I don't take pride in my coding skills. I built Έδωσα Φακελάκι. It's a crowdsourcing platform where Greek citizens can come online and report instances of corruption anonymously, whether they've paid a bribe, whether they've received a bribe. Then πήρα φακελάκι. Surprisingly, many have come forward to tell me why they do it. Doctors especially, because it's under protected anonymity. So they come online and they say, you know what, I take bribes because I want to stay on top of my medical profession and trade. I don't get paid to go to conferences. I actually have to support myself to be the best in what I do, and therefore I am okay to take these bribes because I am underpaid and overworked. And I reported a bribe, κατήγγειλα φακελάκι, success stories. I reported something to the authorities. You face a similar situation. You can learn from me. Let us all see how we can work together on this. And my favorite section, δεν έδωσα φακελάκι. Surprisingly, that is the most powerful section on this website right now. It's like I went to Kristina. She was an amazing orthopedic surgeon, and she didn't take anything. She actually helped me, helped my family, helped my loved one, and didn't take anything. So all of a sudden, this organically transformed itself into sort of a TripAdvisor, in a way, for services, public services. So driving the business away from those who take bribes and rewarding honest public servants who don't. And surprisingly, they'll say the name of a public servant or a public service, for instance. It's not just doctors, because it's very unfair to bang on the medical sector. By no means are all doctors corrupt, but they'll refer to a public service, and you'll see countless of other reports saying, I had a great experience there too, and reinforcing that there are public servants who are honest and who serve their purpose. As you can see, we have almost 2,000 anonymous stories. One public servant was punished for his wrongdoings. I can't disclose further information about that, but this platform was utilized by the Internal Investigations Unit of Greece, and one person was tracked down for his wrongdoings, as was actually removed from his position. We've accumulated over 5,379,000 euros worth in bribes, and we have 29 reports with names that we've shared with the authorities. Here you can see a glimpse of the kinds of stories that you can find on Edo Shafakelaki. The second one I'd like to talk about. It's basically a student who gave 200 euros to receive a driver's permit. That is a very, very common phenomenon in Greece, and it hurts me because that is the first contact that a young person has with Greek society. It teaches our young people that it's okay, and that's how things are done. We have to grease the wheels to get things done. How are we going to change this country if the first contact that young people have with the public is one of corruption? And also, it's also a very, very prime example of how we compromise our ethics on a day-to-day basis. Because students come to me and they say, Kristina, I get it. It's bad to bribe. But 200 euros is going to save me another failure in an exam where I have to repay my paravola, which is the pass that you need to pay for in order to take the exams, and my classes, etc. So the cost-benefit analysis is not in my favor. I might as well go ahead and pay the bribe, get over and done with. We face that on a day-to-day basis. We face it when we are actually not given a receipt because we got a discount or something like that. So we as citizens tend to compromise our ethics on a day-to-day basis, and that is frightening. What Edo Shafakelaki does also is gather extremely interesting statistics. For the first time ever, we can rank the most corrupt public services across the country. So for instance, not surprisingly, you see hospitals number 1, driver's permits number 2, building permits number 3. Number 5 you can see is tax-paying authorities. That is surprising because people who are likely to report whether or not they've ever paid a bribe have usually felt victimized by the act. So they're more likely to come with anger and frustration to report those instances. However, tax-paying authorities, you usually benefit from the transaction. You're less likely to report. And still, surprisingly, it's number 5. I actually think it's much higher than that, but it's good to see the rankings. And also, you can see the average price for bribes paid. On the right, far right column for our non-Greek speakers is the average bribe paid based on the number of reports we have. And Edo Shafakelaki, surprisingly, even though it was just a citizen crowdsourced initiative, has been recognized by all these institutions that you see on the screen. The World Health Organization has used Edo Shafakelaki to create recommendations for the Greek state on how to fight bribery and corruption in Greek hospitals. PhD students at Harvard University have used it for their thesis to support how corruption actually functions in public services. The European Commission, that was the highlight, in 2013 recognized it as the most powerful civic tool used with the power of crowdsourcing technology to actually address corruption within the European Union. The Greek state has utilized it, the General Secretariat Against Corruption, the Internal Investigations Unit, and various other organizations. Business case for anti-corruption. It takes 2 to tango. Civic society, of course, is very important to actually address and combat the phenomenon, but it can't be done without the private sector. I actually worked for the OECD. I am still an OECD analyst, where I advise on the National Anti Corruption Action Plan that Greece has signed as part of the Memorandum of Understanding. And I've been working with my team in Paris on how to basically assist the private sector in Greece to actually become more responsible when it comes to facing corruption. The private sector always tends to blame the public sector. They're always like, oh, they're not changing anything. We have to play by the rules of the game. That's not the case. The private sector can do so much to address this issue. It's actually, the potential is endless. For instance, adopting compliance measures, training employees about how to deal with corrupt officials, adopting whistleblowing hotlines where employees can come online through a protected internal investigation hotline and report whether or not they were faced in a very compromising situation, anonymously and under protection. Setting ethics, having leadership commit to zero tolerance policies. Of course, small to medium-sized enterprises, which is 98% of the Greek economy, can't afford those luxurious resources of legal departments and compliance departments or conducting very fancy risk assessments. But there are ways, and I'll tell you how. But before I actually do that, I'm going to show you, because we have time, a video that I produced with my team from the OECD, where we basically harnessed statements from some of the biggest CEOs in Greece that show us their commitment to fighting corruption and how that is basically the only way forward if we're actually going to attract investment and start our economy. Can we please play the video? Thank you.
Εμποδίζει τις σωστές νέες πρωτοβουλίες. Καλύπτει απλά την στρεβλή και βίαιη ανακατανομή του πλούτου σε βάρος όχι αυτών που τον έχουν, αλλά γενικά του κοινωνικού συνόλου. Η διαφορά, έστω και αν μερικές φορές ορισμένους προσωπικούς αδυναμεί, σε μεσοπρόθεσμο και μακροπρόθεσμο ορίζοντα, κάνει ζημιά στο σύνολο. Σπατάλη του ωφέλιμου δυναμικού, απώλεια παραγωγικών πόρων, μόνο βελτιώνοντας το περιβάλλον άσκησης της επιχειρηματικότητας, μπορούμε να μιλάμε για ανάκαμψη της ελληνικής οικονομίας. We would have a state where we would encourage investors to come back. There would be a lot of trust in business. There would be a lot more certainty. It would mean that your cost of production would go down. It would become much more efficient and be much more competitive on an international scale. Η οικονομική ανάπτυξη της χώρας εξαρτάται από τις επενδύσεις. Η καταπολέμηση της διαφθοράς στον ελληνικό ιδιωτικό τομέα θα μπορούσε να προωθήσει την βιώσιμη οικονομική ανάπτυξη της χώρας. Η διαφάνεια και η λογοδοσία είναι σημαντικές για μια εταιρεία γιατί δημιουργούν ένα κλίμα αξιοπιστίας και εμπιστοσύνης. Αξιοπιστία απέναντι στους συνεργάτες, εργαζόμενους, πελάτες και διαφάνεια. Διαφάνεια απέναντι στην κοινωνία, διαφάνεια απέναντι στους επενδυτές, διαφάνεια απέναντι σε όλους. Για να εδραιώσουμε την κουλτούρα της ηθικής και της καταπολέμησης διαφθοράς στις ελληνικές επιχειρήσεις, νομίζω ότι πρέπει όλοι να κάνουμε και από κάτι. Από πάνω προς τα κάτω. Ξεκάθαρος κανόνας που ισχύει για όλους. We have to ensure that employees are empowered to act in a way that will ensure that they are protectors of the public interest. Πολιτική προστασία των ατόμων που αποκαλύπτουν τη διαφθορά, αλλά κυρίως με το παράδειγμα της ηγεσίας. Οργανωτικά πρότυπα, κώδικες δεοντολογίας και εταιρικές αρχές και αξίες. Με την εφαρμογή των κατάλληλων εργαλείων μέσα στις επιχειρήσεις για την πρόληψη, την ανίχνευση και την καταπολέμηση της διαφθοράς. Η εργασία του εσωτερικού ελέγχου είναι και
οι ηγέτες του αύριο στην επιχειρηματική κοινότητα αναπτύσσονται μέσα από την παιδεία. Η κουλτούρα αλλάζει μέσα από την εκπαίδευση.
Λέξεις που χαρακτηρίζουν την επιχειρηματική ηθική. Νοιαζόμαστε.
Ψυχολογία.
Αρχές.
Ευθύνη, διαχρονικότητα, αμεροληψία.
Υγεία.
Λογοδοσία. Κυριότητα. Βιώσιμη ανάπτυξη.
Ελεγξιμότητα και δικαιοσύνη.
Η Ελλάδα θα είχε την ευκαιρία να βρει τη θέση που της αξίζει διεθνώς.
Θα μπορούσαμε όλοι να είμαστε ακόμα πιο περήφανοι για τη χώρα μας.
Ας ξεκινήσουμε λοιπόν να έχουμε μια καλύτερη κοινωνία, έχοντας πρώτα διαμορφώσει μια καλύτερη επιχείρηση χωρίς διαφορά.
How good did that make you feel? Every time I see this video, I just feel so encouraged. And when I conducted these interviews with all these fantastic CEOs that we should be very proud to have in our country, I felt so encouraged, and I felt that there is actually a promise out there. You see the eagerness for these people who interact with third business party partners abroad and everything, that they understand the importance of having a solid, transparent, and accountable company and how important it is for Greece. But the number one thing that I heard from every single one of them is that we're alone. How are we going to do this if we are just the only ones who are doing it? How are we going to fight the shark when we're not communicating between ourselves? Greece is in dire need for collective action. Like-minded companies, civil society organizations that can actually collaborate on fighting corruption together. I'm actually starting a new project, which I will basically release later this year with some of the CEOs that you just saw in the video, a business coalition against corruption, where Greek companies can come together to address instances of corruption, put pressure on Greek authorities and the state to take action, and also support small to medium-sized enterprises who don't have the financial resources to actually protect themselves. Large multinational enterprises in Greece have fancy legal departments, compliance departments, and experts who can actually, as part of their CSR responsibility, train Greek companies and third business party partners and vendors to actually address corruption and know how to protect themselves from it. And collective action is not just about companies, it's about all of us in this room today. How are we going to address it? How are we taking steps in our daily lives to be active citizens? If we don't do it now, when will we do it? We need to start from the very bottom. We need to start from our schools. Civic education needs to start from elementary school. Children need to learn how to be responsible citizens, honest citizens, transparent citizens. We have to enter our universities and talk about transparency and accountability. We are breeding in our business schools the leaders of Greek companies of tomorrow. What are we telling them about corruption? Are we going into our medical schools and teaching our future doctors about the market that they're going to face as soon as they leave the university, the doors? That they're actually going to be in a system where to get care, one needs to pay out of their pocket, and the most vulnerable are affected? How does that make them feel, and how true is that to the oath that they take as doctors? We need to start talking seriously about ethical training within our universities, within our companies, and amongst ourselves. And I want you all to walk away today to think what you do on a day-to-day basis to ensure that transparency is upheld in our country. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye. Thank you.